Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? I'm fine. And then this Magursa from Magda Home course. I'm here to tell you about the second chapter and then second part of this data science. In previous class, we have seen about the definition of data science and then define also what's data, what's information, and then what is data types, especially in which perspective of this analytics perspective we have classified the data types. And then uh, after that also finally we have seen about the data value chains as a data value chains. So today I'm going to tell you the second part and then the last part for this chapter. Then this second part of the chapter is talking about the big data concept or the concept of or concepts of big data. Actually, what makes the data big or why it is said to be as the big data? This is the first question or the question when we are reading or listening to this concept. The question coming to our mind is about the what makes the data is big. What is that? So in which manner we can say this is a big data or this data is very big or like something? Actually, the concept of this big data is came from the management of data, how to manage, how to handle the data. So since it is very large and then impossible to handle and then manage the data easily because of the increment of the users all over the world, and then that is why the concept of big data and then the solution for the management or problem for this is came. Actually, when we are talking this big data, we can relate with the blankets. The blanket term, that means what? Which is a very large and then thick, in which we cannot traditionally manage, control, and then gather, organize, and process the insights from the large data set. So, big data is what? It is a large data, which is a large data or a huge data. So in that manner, it is impossible to traditionally organize, traditionally gather, and then process different knowledge and then insights from this type of big data or data sets. So why that is happened, the idea or the concept of that one is occurred when it is impossible to work with data, especially or handle the data which is exceeding the computing power of the computer, or storing this type of large amount of data on a single computer. That is a problem. So to store or to save or to manage the data or this much large amount of data on a single computer is a very problem. Is very problem. So in that case, this concept of this big data came to the idea of the people, and then the experts decide to talk about this big data and then the solution for this concept of big data. So another way, big data is a term for a collection of data sets, especially so large or complex that it might become difficult to process using the on-hand database management tools or traditional way. In traditional way, we cannot handle, we cannot manage this large amount of data and then a complex amount of data. That is why it is better to get the idea of this data and then get some solution about this concept. Okay, the other point is about characteristics of this big data. If the data is large or big, and then it is difficult to handle and then manage this data easily, so how can we say this large data is known or basically understood by the users? So when we are saying this big data, we can characterize, or we can see the characteristics of this big data in four V's. We can say that four V's or characteristics of this big data. When we say it is a big data, we should see in different four angles or perspectives. The first one is about the volume. The volume. The second one is about the velocity. Then the third one is about the variety, and then the last one is about the veracity. When we are talking about the volume is the amount of the data which we are accessing or processing, because we are always using the data when we are using the data. Last time, if you remember, I said that if there is no data, there is no anything on this world, because the data is the oil or the source of the living things which we are always processing, storing, whatever. This is based on the data. So when we are using or accessing the data, the users of this data becomes very large or increasing, and then in that case the data which we can process or download or upload or use might be what, very large. So we can see in volume perspective. So this volume means, or normally it is a large amount of data. When we are saying large amount of data, it might be what, about the zettabyte, petabyte, gigabyte, like that, the amount of the data we are using. So what that is, in short, the massive data set or large data set. The second one is velocity. Data is live streaming or in motion. That means what? When we are using the data, the amount of the data accessed or processed will be moving in different location. That means what? When we, let's say some example, when we are using social media like Facebook, we are adding our photos, we are adding our voices, we are adding different volume or with different size data. So when we are adding or inserting or uploading some data to the storage or pool of the data, then there is the movement of the data. That means what? About the compression of the data and then relaxation of the data. It can be compressed and then it can be released or freely available. So when we are adding some data into other data, the previously valid data, and then it will become also in motion or moving to something or location. So the third one is about the variety. That means what? The data comes in from different forms, or the data can contain different forms. Because, for example, if you remember in last time, I have said that the data types as the analytics perspectives, we said about the static, the structured, semi-structured, and then structured data. These are the forms of the data. The forms of the data. So these types of data are what? In different varieties or different forms. So that is the source of data. The last one is about the veracity. That means the trustworthiness of the data. That means what? When we are using the data, we should suspect that as if the data is correct or not, or has a quality or not. So we can say always when we are hearing some information, or when we are listening or reading something or watching something, we are always what? In a question. Is that the right data? Is that correct data? Can I accept or not? Can I trust this type of data or not? This is the trustworthiness of the data that is called the veracity. Veracity. But then sorry, look, for example, we can summarize this one in this form or in this way. Because when we are saying the volume, they can be considered at the scale of the data. When we are saying the velocity, what is the analysis of the data or movement of the data. When we are saying about the veracity, we are saying that uncertainty of the data. Are you certain on that data or not? Which is that. Then when we are talking about the variety, different forms of the data. So that is why in this way, look at this picture or figure. It is talking about the data. For example, in the first one, the data is arranged in this volume format. That means the data are in the rest without any movement. Then when something is added to that one, and then it is changed into the velocity. That means in the velocity, there is the data movement from one position to another position. And then the variety is a different type of the data. That means structured and unstructured data. And then the other one is, you see the in a velocity the data looks like as blurred like that. That means what? It is not clear. You cannot easily or clearly understand or make that one is trusted or not, or the certainty of this data is what? Unknown. So in that case we are always what? We are ambiguous. We are entering into the ambiguity because it is about accepting the data or not, or verifying as if the data is correct or not, or important or not. That is why these types of the characteristics of big data looks like this one. Then when we are talking to the next step about the users of the big data, who are the users of this big data? Actually, we know that different users or different people or different organization or different companies are stakeholders, especially they are generating the big data. For example, you can see in as a social media and the networks like the Facebook, the Twitter, the Telegram, or YouTube, or Netflix, or whatever. So Amazon, these all are what? The social medias on which you are going to access and then do whatever we want. And then the other generator of this social media and the generators of this big data are the scientific researchers. Then the scientific instrument users are what? They are collecting different data, different sort of data from different angles. So they are what? They are generating, they are producing the big data. The other one is the mobile devices. These mobile devices are what? The devices which can be moved from one position to another position. They are what? Taking the tracking all objects all the time. And then the other one is the sensor technology and networks. Especially the sensors are nowadays the one part of the artificial intelligences or the emerging technologies which we can manage this world or which we can manage this environment, because the sensors can sense, can measure, can do any data which is found on this world. So these are some basic companies or organizations which can generate the big data. Actually, there are a lot of other generators of this big data. Look, for example, the users of this big data can see every 1 minute of the day. Within a single day, there are a lot of users, or every minute, in 1 minute, the amount of data or the amount of the users of this big data looks like this one. You can consider each and every of the users or people. Especially what I am amazed to these social media users or big data users are about the newly emerged social media, which is called as the TikTok, that everybody knows and then everybody's are always on using. It is what the maximum user of this world's people. The users are about what? About 167 million people are accessing, uploading, and then using this data. And then also you can see the Google also like that. The Google is about 5.7 million, and then the image, different image can be processed like that. And then you can see there is, for example, about the Facebook users of the Facebook, and then whatever processing the YouTube also. So these all are what? The Zooms. These all are what? The users of the social media, and then instantly when they are accessing within a day, from the day, within a minute, within a minute, this much of the users are accessing or using the social media or accessing the big data. So daily, monthly, weekly, yearly, the users of this social media is increasing, and then the big data is what becoming very increasing. Okay, the other point is about the cluster computing and then Hadoop ecosystem. Actually, cluster computing is what? Clustering means what? Classifying or dividing or putting into different branches or into different storage areas, because previously I've said that we cannot easily handle the large amount of this data on a single repository or storage area, like only a single computer or a single storage area, because it is more than the storage area of that. So in that way, there is the importance of clustering or dividing this type of data into different storage areas. So clustered computing is what? It is clustering and then executing, dividing and then processing. That is the meaning of this clustered computing. So because of the qualities of big data, individual computers are often inadequate for handling the data at most stages. That's why. So to better address the higher storage and then computational needs of big data, the computer clusters are a better fit. Because we should what? Cluster the data. This clustering means about the division. So what is the importance of or the merit of this clustering of the data? What can we get from this clustering data? The first one is resource pooling. That means what? Combining the available storage space to hold the data. Different spaces, different storage areas should be what? Combined together, collected together, and then create what? They can create the resource pooling. Obviously, this pooling means what? For example, if you want to swim water, that is, you can say it is what? Pool, water pool. That means what? The storage of the waters in which you are going to swim. So in this resources pooling, different resources are what? Combined together, and then the available storage areas will be free or okay for handling the storing the data. So for that purpose, resource pooling is important. The other one is high availability. That means what? Sometimes since the data are clustered or stored in different storage areas, then there is the probability of the getting the copy of the data which we may lost from one storage area, or some fault may be happen on the computers or storage area of one location. It might be corruption or corrupted, or it might be deliberately or intentionally deleted or corrupted data. So in that case, we can get from another areas. So this is important for guaranteeing to prevent the hardware and the software failures from affecting the accessing data and then processing. Because if one storage or one location of the data storage hardware or software may be destroyed or corrupted, then there is a probability of getting the same data from other storage area. So this is a very and then better benefits of clustering the data. The other one is easy scalability. That means what? You can easily scalable your data. How can you scalable the data? That means what? For example, your storage area might be in different location, and then maybe in 3 or 4 clustered areas. So since the users of the data increasing, when they become to increase, and then you are supposed to provide additional storage area for storing the data which is uploading by the users. So in that case, you can probably add the data to the existing data storage areas. That is about the easily scalable of the scaling the data or scalability of the data. You can what? Add additional machine to the obviously group. So if you previously have 4 storage area, then if you add one machine or storage area, then you can get about the 5. So it is what? Scaled or enlarged or extended the storage area. And that is why the things we can easily get or uh, important about this clustering of the data. So cluster membership, especially the cluster membership and then resource allocation, can be held by the software like the Hadoop's yarn. Yarn means what? Which is yet another resource negotiator. That means what? This is what the software which handles, in which we can cluster the data and then allocate the resources. Unless the knowledge of this Hadoop yarn, you cannot do clustering your membership or you cannot allocate your data easily. That means what? Somewhat there is a restriction of accessing and then processing the data if you are not what? If you are not eligible for that one. So there is a rule in which we can use this. Okay, the other or the last one is about the Hadoop and it is ecosystem. Hadoop is what? It is a software. It is an open source software or framework intended to make the interaction with the big data easier. That means what? You can open source means what? You can freely access, you can freely use and then customize the software by your own, and then you can have the interaction with the big data easily. So Hadoop is what? The used for the distributed processing of large data sets across the large clusters of the computers. When we are saying about the data set and then large clusters or a large data set means what? About the size of the data. And then we are talking about the cluster, the amount of the nodes or stations in which the data are stored. Okay, so the Hadoop has 4 key characteristics. The first one is the economical. That means what? Ordinary computers can be used for the data processing. The other one is about the reliable. That means what? It stores copies of the data on different machines. That means what? The availability of the data. You can get the copy of data if something happen on your data. Then the fourth one is scalable. That can be easily scalable or add or remove the data storage area or devices from the original one. Then the last one is flexible. It is what? Flexible, and then you can store as much structured or unstructured data as you need. That means what? For example, when you are using Facebook or any social media, you did not restricted to upload your profile picture or some audio or some video or whatever, because it is possible, it is flexible to accept. That is the best thing. You are not restricted to use or to access the data you want from that one. So Hadoop is continuously growing in to meet the needs of the big data. Okay, some components of the Hadoops, especially when we are using this Hadoop or the open source framework, or, which we use to interact with the other big data easily, then the Hadoops has a ecosystem, especially when it is used in a or having ecosystem, then it is involved from it is 4 core components. That means the Hadoop's 4 core components. So these 4 core components are what? The 4 core components are what? The first one is data management. The second one is data access, and then data processing. Lastly, it is data storage. These are the 4 core components of the Hadoop in the ecosystem. So when we are using this one in the ecosystem, there are 2 main components for data storage. Especially when you are focusing on the data storage, then there are 2 components. The first one is HDFS. HDFS means what? Hadoop distributed file system. This Hadoop distributed file system is the major component of Hadoop ecosystem, and then it is responsible for storing large amounts of the data, maybe structured or unstructured data. Then the other one is the HBase Hadoop base. This Hadoop base is actually not structured query language. That means what? Unstructured data, not structured data. So it is used to support all kinds of data and then capable of handling anything of Hadoop database. This is HBase. The other Hadoop's part is about for processing the ecosystem. Hadoop for processing the ecosystem. The first one is for management, and then second one is for processing. So to process the data ecosystem in ecosystem, we can again get this type of the points, which is about the yarn, and then there is the map radius. The yarn is what? To manage the resources across the cluster. Different clusters are there, and then it is possible to handle or to manage, used to manage the processing data. When the data is processing, each and every step or track of the data will be managed or controlled by the yarn. And then the other one is the map radius. Especially this map radius is, it is possible to carry over the processing logic and then help us to write applications with which they transform big data set into the manageable one. That means what? It is about processing the logic communication of the data, and then also help to write the applications which transform big data set into what? Into manageable format, or in the manageable form. Actually, this I can easily get the concept. And then again, the data for accessing the Hadoop, to access the data from the components of this Hadoop is about different, again, additional points or ideas. The first one is Hive. This performs reading and then writing data, large data sets, especially when we are using the data, we are accessing, we are processing, we are executing the data. So when we are doing this one, the Hive's purpose is what? To access the data. You are supposed to read some data or write the data on the large data sets. And then the other one is the PIG. Then the structure, especially the data flow, processing, and then analyzing huge data. That means what? It gives different structures. It is used to what? Structuring the data flow. When the data is on the processing, and then how the data can flow from one to another, and then how it should be processed, and then how can we analyze, or how it should be analyzed. That means what? If after this one, after this data is processed, then where it is going, and then how it is used, how many users are waiting for this type of data. These all things should be managed or structured by the peak. The other one is mouth. This mouth is used to provide various functionalities, like for example collaborative filtering, clustering, classification. So it is about providing different algorithms which help us of its own libraries. So it is providing what? Having some different algorithms and then used to see and then provide some functionalities on the collaborative of the data. The other one is for data management as an ecosystem. This is Hadoop used for data management. So when it is used in data management, the ecosystem have this type of the things. That means what? The first one is Solar or Lesson. This Listen or Solar is searching and then indexing the data. Especially when we are using the data, it is searching or finding the location of the data and then giving index, giving identification or ID number for each and every of the data. Then the second one is Zookeeper. This Zookeeper is managing the clusters. Each and every cluster of the data should be managed. And then the other one is Uzi. This Uzi is job scheduling. That job scheduling is actually in like operating system, and then when something is on processing, then each and every of data should be scheduled to be expressed or processed, because there is a priority of processing the data. So it is what used to schedule for each and every of the data to be processed. And then the flume is used to especially monitoring. The last point about this one is about the big data lifecycle with Hadoop. Especially there are, if you remember in the previous chapter 2, part 1, we have seen about the data lifecycle, about input, processing, and then output. The same is true here also in the big data lifecycle in Hadoop. The first one is ingesting data into the system. That means what? Entering or putting the data or transferring the data to the Hadoop from various sources. And then after you used or inserted or transferred the data, it needs what? Some processing the data in the storage. That means what? It is used to process on the stored data and then need to execute or change into the processing or executing. After that, uh, sorry, the third one is computing and then analyzing the data. Data is analyzed by processing frameworks. When the data is on processing, it is analyzed. Finally, visualizing and then putting the result of that data. These all are about the second part of the second chapter in the data science. So I would like to stop here. Thank you for listening and then watching, or thank you for having time with me. And then I would like to stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much. See you next time. If you have any question or suggestion, you can give a comment. And then to get another additional points or the next video from this course, and then you can add or subscribe or like and then follow my YouTube or lesson. Thank you. Bye bye.